What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another modern video, and it feels so good to finally get back to the camera and just kind of go over some really just magic content and stuff like that, kind of get my mind off like what's been going on in the world and everything. So this week we have an interesting deck. It made the finals of the Modern Challenge this past weekend, and it's not really a deck that people would come to their mind when thinking about top decks like in the modern format, to say the least. I would say a deck that has a solid like cult following just for the fact that it is an archetype that has stood the test of time. It's seems to always be getting new things, and now all of a sudden it's been kind of like pushed over the edge and showing up a lot more. We'll even see that even 5-0 to League as recent as yesterday, or as like the uploading of this video and stuff like that. So maybe you know what I'm talking about, maybe you don't. We're gonna take a look at Merfolk and just kind of check out the deck and see what has now happened to it and what evolution, could give it the opportunity to become the deck that it is now in the modern format. So let's go ahead and take a look at the deck. So here we have the Merfolk deck piloted by SS0. Again, that took second place in the Modern Challenge over the weekend, losing to Demonic Tutors playing Yawgmoth, which, just as like a quick analysis before we really get into the deck, I would think that Yawgmoth would have a pretty decent matchup against like Merfolk, just because I feel like I'm pretty favored in like some of the creature matchups and stuff like that. It's kind of what this deck is. So before we get too deep into that, I would just like to thank everyone that has subscribed to the channel, so showing support and continued support through like the mini hiatus that we took. Probably about a week and a half, so I am appreciative of that. And of course, if you are watching my videos for the first time, I would be ever grateful if you consider subscribing to the channel, ringing the notification bell so you know when I post videos, as I post modern and pioneer content, kind of side by side, just as like two of the formats that I definitely enjoy playing the most, and what I get the most out of when playing Magic and stuff like that. Also, to know, there is a Discord server that you can join. The link is in the description of this video, so go ahead and jump over there and we can talk about Magic and stuff like that. That's always fun. But yeah, without further ado, let's kind of take a look at the Merfolk deck. And Merfolk, kind of in the same vein that like made humans very popular and even like goblins and stuff like that, has a little artifact called Aether Vial. Now, Aether Vial is very interesting because like this card was printed back in like Mirrodin or whatever. It's like actually a pretty old card, printed like uncommon, and it's like $1 million. So Aether Vial is a 1 mana artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep you may put a charge counter on Aether Vial, and you can tap it and put a creature with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on Aether Vial from your hand onto the battlefield. So Aether Vial is basically like a way that you can cheat on mana. So like you play this on turn one, preferably, and then turn two, you're able to play like a 2 mana uh, Merfolk, and then play like a 1 mana one, and then take this up to two. You're able to play two, and then possibly a three. And essentially like the amount of mana that like you generate with Aether Vial keeps getting higher and higher the more creatures and stuff like that you're able to play, and ends up letting you double spell it, quote unquote, by like turn two, which is kind of what this deck wants to do, is just kind of overload your opponent with like threats, play a bunch of lords. You have cards like Master of the Pearl Trident and Lord of Atlantis. Lord of Atlantis is a pretty old lord. Not sure exactly what set it was reprinted in to make it modern legal, but all Merfolk get Island Walk and +1/+1. Master of the Pearl Trident, same thing. Other Merfolk creatures you control get +1/+1, have Island Walk. I believe then the Voldelian Hex Catcher, which is actually from Dominaria United, gives your other Merfolk +1/+1 and turns them into Curse Catchers. Which, if you don't know what Curse Catcher is, this is what it is: just a 1 mana 1/1 that you can sacrifice to counter instant sorcery spell unless you pay one. Unless the controller pays one. Voldelian Hex Catcher actually having the added benefit of it being a non-creature spell, so it does give your Merfolk more flexibility and things like that. Glasspool Mimic, while not necessarily a Merfolk, it is a creature that is relatively cheap that can copy other Merfolk and stuff. I believe they would play cards similar to like Phantasmal Image, but Phantasmal Image cares about obviously being targeted, because if it's targeted, it gets sacrificed. So at least with Glasspool Mimic, you have a card that doubles as a land if you need it. On top of that, just a 3 mana like clone effect on one of your lords, or maybe even like on subtlety and things like that. Just like a good thing to just copy things. You're only playing two, so that's fine. Going through some of the other Merfolk, I mean, you have your 12 lords. You have Silvergill Adept, which forces you to reveal a Merfolk or pay an extra 3 mana. So it ends up being like a 5 mana 2/1. Then when it enters the battlefield, draws a card, or you pay 2 mana and reveal another Merfolk. Aether Vial does actually get around the additional cost of having to reveal or pay 3. So if you just have an Aether Vial on 2 and you put a Silvergill into play, then you just get to draw a card. You don't have to reveal any information and things like that. Continuing on, Civaloon, the Sea and Sky is actually new from like Modern Horizons 2. Obviously not the newest Merfolk, but a card that was printed in that set to kind of give support to Merfolk. As indestructible, as long as you control 2 other Merfolk you control have Ward 1, and whenever it attacks, you draw a card. Ward 1 says that whenever another Merfolk you control, because it gives the ability, if you will, or the effect or ability, I'm not really sure, but it gives it to the other Merfolk, and if your opponent would target it with a spell or ability they control, they would have to pay 1 or the ability gets countered. So this card allows you to be offensive. It does play defense pretty well, being like a 3/4 for 3. Um, and yeah, again, if you just have multiple Merfolk and the board is kind of a ground stall, you kind of can win those games just by having a big body that's indestructible. Play enough lords, this thing can attack or put your opponent in the abyss, forcing the chump block, and then you get to draw a card and hopefully just kind of keep pressing that advantage and stuff. So really sweet card. Definitely helps you out a lot when you do have the turns where you play turn 1 Aether Vial and you're just playing multiple Merfolk a turn. Your opponent has to deal with multiple creatures before they can deal with your indestructible Merfolk God. Um, yeah, then we have like 2 Dismember. This is like generally how the tribal decks want to look. Is they kind of have some cheap early threats, Curse Catcher being one that can be disruptive, Tide Shaper can even be disruptive its own right, and with its ability, its kicker ability, where you can essentially pay 2 mana, you can have a land become an island for as long as Tide Shaper remains on a battlefield. And if I remember correctly, I think if you target Urza Saga with this, that it actually like blows up the Urza Saga. So you won't get the +1/+1 from your opponent controlling an island, but Tide Shaper can pull double duty of being a land destruction spell for like Urza Sagas potentially, if not just like messing with your opponent's mana and just, you know, giving this +2 and +1 so it can be like a 2/2, or giving the rest of your Merfolk, enabling like the Island Walk ability on it, because some of these decks used to play like Spreading Seas to kind of enable it because it also drew a card, but Tide Shaper being a body on top of, the extra cost not really being an issue. If you put this into play from a Aether Vial, you do not get to pay the kicker cost as a thing to know. And I know I kind of get bad when explaining some of these things, but that is something that you should know. Aether Vial as well. There's like a ton of tricks to it, which I can go over here because we've kind of hit like some of the important, and by some I mean like all really of the important Merfolk and some of the intrinsic like synergies for the deck. So like Aether Vial, some tricks that you can do with it. Obviously, you want to be very well aware of the converted mana cost of cards, maybe what you've even seen, and familiarize yourself so Aether Vial is set on settings that give you the best chance of actually playing something. Um, Aether Vial, you're able to activate at instant speed and put the creature into play at instant speed. Some instances where it could come up is like if your opponent decides to like sweep the board, like Anger of the Gods or like Pyroclasm, some kind of effect like that, and you have like a Glasspool Mimic or like another Lord in your hand, that would end up like saving all of these other creatures. You're able to just activate Aether Vial in response and put it into play and save your creatures as kind of like a I gotcha moment. Aether Vial also like activating it when you want to tick it up, but you want to be able to use it. You could activate it again like on upkeep to put like a 2 cost thing into play, and then put a third counter on it, just anticipating like having a 3 mana card come off the top or something like that. So definitely some things you can do with Aether Vial. The trigger does use the stack, so you don't get to just activate it and then immediately put something into play. Um, your opponent does have to respond to the trigger of activating Aether Vial before anything else. So there's some other cards where that's a little bit more relevant to how that interacts. But for this deck in particular, if your opponent wants to stop like ETB triggers with, say, dress down and things like that, they have to respond to the Aether Vial trigger. They do not get a chance after the creature, or they do not get a chance before the creature comes into play um, after the Aether Vial trigger resolves. So just something to know. The mana base is pretty simple. 8 islands. You have 4 Caverner Souls. This is like a mainstay for all the Goblin decks, for the Merfolk decks, Elves, blah blah blah, etc., so on and so forth. Just being able to color fix, even though you're in a mono blue deck. Uh, the more important part of it being that it gives the creature spells of the chosen type the fact that they can't be countered. So that's mainly the important thing. Obviously, for like humans and stuff like that, the color fixing is like super important. But specifically for Merfolk, you just get to have uncounterable creatures. Um, Monomino, you get to untap target legendary permanent, so you can kind of give like your Selvoon, Sea and Sky, like untap it and just have it play offense and defense. Kind of give it like pseudo vigilance. I don't think there's really any other like legendary creatures. In fact, looking through the deck list really quick, there isn't any other legendary creatures. So it's just like a one of that you can play. I think decks like this would always play like this, and then a Boro Palace of Clouds. They would just play a one of it. You know, there is, I'm sure, some cases where like a Boro just kind of like comes into play, but a Boro's also always been a one of Merfolk for like ever. For Mutavault, because they are honorary Merfolk creatures, they are 2/2s with all creature types, so they do get buffs and bonuses from your lords. They do get Island Walk and things like that, and count towards giving Sevaloon, Sea and Sky indestructible as well. So good things to keep in mind. Also can be used to activate, to essentially like counter non-creature spells with the Voldelian Hex Catcher, making it a Merfolk being able to sacrifice it to counter a non-creature spell. And Otawara, Soaring City, I think another card that's going to kind of be a one of in these kinds of decks. Just for the fact that, again, it's a land that taps for white mana and has the utility of bouncing just about anything to its owner's hand, saving your own creatures, bouncing your own opponent's things, etc., so on and so forth. The sideboard, nothing super interesting, just kind of, I would say, kind of basic. Harbinger of the Tides, being a card that I think saw a decent amount of play in decks like this, because like you could pay 4 mana and flash it in, or the fact that it was 2 mana, you could leave your Aether Vial on 2, play this, and then it returns the tap creature to its owner's hand. Kind of gave you some tempo when like your opponent's being aggressive. Harbinger of the Tides could just bounce like maybe one of their bigger creatures back to their hand to give you some tempo, and they probably would have to wait, until their next turn to play it, and then a turn after that to attack. Which at that point, you can easily win a race by having just a few attacks go off. Chalice of the Void, definitely being for like the Cascade decks, is very important, and this is like a way that they can answer it like on turn 0, very easily. Hurkyl's Recall, uh, honestly not 1,000% sure. I know like Hammer could be like a really hard matchup. Like Dismember really can't answer like hammers and stuff like that. After they've already found their way onto a creature, which I'm sure those come in for those matchups anyway, just to get rid of like creatures and just try to like force like a race. Force of Negation again for like some of those pesky like Cascade decks, so you're able to interact with them. And then one Kira, Great Glass Spinner. This card is another card that kind of would like see play as like one or two of in like main decks. Kind of come in, kind of come out. Subtlety probably on its face is the most versatile of the two creatures. Kira is definitely more of the like I'm going to be aggressive and I'm going to lean towards being more the beatdown because it has the ability that gives your creatures that you control that whenever they become the target with a spell or ability for the first time each turn, you counter that spell or ability. Of note, if you target one of your own creatures with a spell or ability with Kira, that you do get that spell or ability countered. So just something to know. Really wouldn't necessarily come up in this deck. I mean, like if you try to like auto Aura like your Kira for some reason, like save it, you would have to obviously target it with something beforehand to be able to do it. Same thing with like Monomino. If you target the Kira with it, or any of your like Suvaloon or whatever, it will get countered. And that's the Merfolk deck for Modern. Kind of interesting deck to like come back to. And even like seeing it is pretty amazing because it's a deck that kind of like shows up and people play it. It gets some new support, and it definitely comes out of the woodwork and then just kind of disappears. But here lately, and seeing like all the results and everything, it seems like it's a deck that could possibly be here to stay and maybe helps like shift the metagame in a different direction. I mean, we've haven't had really any bannings or unbannings. The format just kind of stayed the same, and I know people are kind of getting stale and tired of it, and just printing new sets and stuff just isn't enough to shake up the metagame. People want to see cards unbanned. People want to see cards banned. So it's just kind of cool seeing a deck kind of show up after the format just being stagnant for a while. So that's always good. But yeah, that's going to do it for me this video. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like on the video, as well as hitting the notification bell and subscribing to the channel so you know when I post videos and things like that. And it's just fun to hang out. Be sure to follow the link in the description to the Discord server. Of course, feel free to join, talk about magic and all that fun, happy stuff. And yeah, that's going to do it for me this video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one.